my name's Jude Holland, and I am a female professional abuse recovery coach. You can find me at judeholland.coach. And you can also find me on Amazon. I have a couple of books out there on Amazon as well, so you can find me on there.
Perfect. So take us right from the very beginning, Jude. And how did you get involved in this and why?
Okay. I suppose it makes sense when I kind of start from the beginning. So the beginning of this relationship, I lost my mum. My mum died 13 years ago. And then 2 days later, I found out that my long-term partner was in another relationship. So I threw him out. And then from that, in connection to emotional regulation, I was using alcohol to help me cope in connection to my mum's death. I went on a dating site, and that's ultimately where I met my abuser, and we were then, I was then in an abusive relationship for the next 6 years.
Wow. Can I start with that and say, wow? Like I know there's some people who will have their comments when it comes to dating apps. So we'll park that for a little bit. But for
Mm-hmm.
you, you're going through all of this. Is it around the same time that this was all happening? Was it like back to back to back, or was there some gaps in between all your potentially traumatic relationships that you were enduring?
Ultimately, I would say probably within a 6 to 12 months period from losing my mum. That was the kind of period where I then met my abuser. So ultimately, from my perspective, looking back, I was in a very vulnerable place when I met this person. So that was the beginning of the relationship. And well, I'll start off with giving you his background a little bit, which then kind of helps to feed in. So he was a sales guy, and he came across very grandiose, and everyone kind of loved him, and but not at all what things were like behind closed doors. So, and the beginning of the relationship, one of the things that I would look back and look at now is, and maybe as a yellow flag, was that he wanted me to move in with him quite quickly. So within 6 months we moved in together. So, and then within 12 months of us being together, he then lost his job and didn't work for the next 6 years. So ultimately, generally for most people, financial abuse can generally be the first part of an abusive relationship. So now looking back, I recognize that as being, the beginning of the end, if you like.
I think that's a step that's missed, where
Mm-hmm.
it's the financial abuse, and I think maybe it doesn't get as much attention as maybe the other
Mm-hmm.
forms, right? Like physical abuse, you can see the
Yes.
scars, the damage, right?
Yes.
Mental abuse, you can see the maybe change in the person's behavior. You can't see the scars, but
Mm-hmm.
their reaction to it may change. They may be home a lot more. They may be isolated. Their moods may
Mm-hmm.
change. They may be more sad, less energy.
Mm-hmm.
Emotional abuse as well.
Mm-hmm.
Financial abuse, I think a lot of times people don't see that is because your finances is still very private to many people,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
right?
Yes. And ultimately, at the beginning of that relationship, obviously things were good. So I felt responsible in that relationship then in connection. So all the way through our relationships, I was working 3 jobs, because ultimately, your bills have to be paid, you have to look after yourself. So I felt responsible. I think that was part of what, to some degree, kept me there in connection to my value base, that I knew that when I left, this person would not have a home, did not have financial security. So though everything that had gone on and how bad that was, I still felt responsible to some degree.
And women in general will score a lot higher on those things when it comes to the personality test, right? Like when it comes to the agreeableness, the nurturing, more so than men. So I think that's why you have women, they get trapped that way, where it's like, okay, I'm capable of taking care of this person. If I leave them, there won't be someone else, but there is someone else to take care of them. One, there's themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, the thing with abusers that a lot of people I think miss is that they're very good at finding the person to abuse. Would you
Yes.
agree?
Yes. And from my perspective, I was already in that vulnerable place when I met this person, that I wanted that connectedness with somebody. I wanted that intimacy because I felt really vulnerable and alone in that loss ultimately. So, everything that was going on for me kind of fed into, um, you know, creating how the abuser wanted it to be. So within that 6 months period, I did move in with him. So obviously at that point, things were good. But actually, in doing that, what I did do was isolate myself from family and friends, and looking back, I can recognize that now, but you don't recognize that in the beginning when things are good in that relationship.
And Jude, like the mask will always fall
Hmm.
from the abuser, right? And I
Yeah.
want to one thing I want to clarify to some people is that there are the relationships, like when you're in a healthy relationship, the person does want to spend a lot of time with you, right?
Hmm.
Meaning that, okay, let's go do activities in public. A lot of times, what the abuser does is that they would isolate you from the outside world,
Hmm.
right? Where it's
Yes.
okay, whatever it is that you're going to do, it has to be indoors. That is a big difference. So I don't want someone to say
Hmm.
that, well, Train, my
Hmm.
my girlfriend, she's always planning trips and we're going. I'm like, you're not being abused. She loves you.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Right?
Or the other side of that is that if you are going outside, then I'm coming with you. That you're not spending time on your own. That that time is always with that other person.
Yeah, I call that like tailgating, where it's like, let's say, for example, Judy and I are in a relationship and you're saying you're going to the store. Okay, I'm coming.
Yes.
Let's say, oh, I'm just going to the mailbox. Okay, I'll be there too. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
it's like when you
Mm-hmm.
when you do go outside, their eyes are still on you, right?
Yes.
Because abusers in a lot of ways are very insecure
Yes.
when it comes to her, right? Insecure in the
Yes.
way that not that the insecure in what you're doing, the insecure is that okay, if you two were to leave my presence, you may realize you're being abused and you may seek
Mm-hmm.
help or you may seek an escape,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I think even when you're in the presence, there is a sense of who is that message of, or and when you're not in their presence, it's contacting you via text message. So you're constantly in contact with that person, whether you're with them or not.
Yeah, I was in a relationship where this was many years ago, and
Hmm.
I was fortunate enough to realize what was going on, but it did take me some time. And what I
Hmm.
realized is that this person, their phone was an extension of themselves. So when they were in constant contact with me, it was like their hand was on me. I was like, okay,
Hmm.
I know where he is,
Hmm.
right? But for me, I'm such a routine person
Hmm.
where it was kind of unusual. But looking back, it's like, okay, I go to work. After work, you know what? I come home, I get
Yes.
some eat, then I go to the gym.
Yeah.
That makes it very easy for the abuser because once they understand your routine, they're like, okay,
Hmm.
I know Train's going to be here during this time,
Hmm.
there during this time, and the
Yes.
expectation is that he's going to be home around 9 p.m. Now, if
Yeah.
9 p.m. comes around and he's not home, oh my God, what is he
Hmm.
doing?
And
Right?
I think for me, it was, I will take you to work. I will pick you up from work, which sounds lovely, doesn't it? Someone's going to take you to work, they're going to pick you up from work, they're looking after you. But actually, the other side of that coin is I know where you are. I'm controlling where you are.
And it's interesting to see how you can have someone that's abusing someone and the difference is between the men and women. Like in general, the men will want to be around you. I'll drop you here, I'll drive you here, I'll be there. With a woman, it's more so, okay, I want to know where you're going. I want to be
Uh-huh.
connected. right? Like you see how
Yeah.
even though
Yeah.
abuse is abuse, but you see how the two different ways for the same
Mm-hmm.
situation. So I
Mm-hmm.
know because most of the time the man is going to drive the woman where she wants to go, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I the phone represents me. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
not answering your phone, it's like you're not talking to me. So therefore, what are you doing? Whereas on the
Yeah.
male's perspective, it's like, okay, I'm going to drive you there because I'm still observing you in the physical sense. Would you agree?
Yes, very much so. And also I'm observing you in the physical sense and I know where you are.
Because that's big for them. So when you are going through your abuse, I know
Mm-hmm.
some of the women that I've spoken to, they've mentioned the vulnerability as you shared.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one thing they did mention is that even though the attention in the beginning, even though, sorry, the relationship was good in the beginning and it may have deteriorated,
Mm-hmm.
in their mind, they're thinking they shared that terrain. I had someone that was giving me attention, whether it was good or bad. And at that point in my life, I really need attention from someone,
Mm-hmm.
especially a
Mm-hmm.
male figure. Is that something that you were
Mm-hmm.
experiencing as well?
I would say there was a sense of not wanting to be alone, have to leaving my mum, losing my mum. I think there was a real sense of not wanting to be alone. But I think there were lots of factors for me, that I'd moved in with him. So I hadn't got a home. I had 6 dogs. So, to leave and rent somewhere would be difficult because where can you go with 6 dogs? I had an elderly parent, um, when you think about going living back home. So it's like the options to actually get out and have somewhere to live was difficult. So I felt kind of stuck in the environment that I was in.
And when you were feeling stuck in that situation, although there was a benefit to you, right? And
Hmm.
I think that's what
There
happens
was
with
a
a lot of
secondary
people.
gain. Uh-huh.
Yeah, right. There is a gain. And the reason why I bring that up is I want people to understand when someone is being abused, it's not that there isn't, it's not like they're in a situation and it's completely 100% bad. They're in the beginning, there was actually a benefit to for them to
Yes.
be in that situation with a potential abuser. It's like, okay, I needed a place to live, my finances, attention. This
Hmm.
person made me feel good in ways that maybe I wasn't feeling good because I had the death of a mother, I had the death of a family
Hmm.
member. So when you're
Hmm.
going through, like looking back now and you're reflective on what you were going through, were you surprised that you got caught up in that situation?
I was very surprised. I think there was something for me around, you know, emotional, mental abuse, the kind of not wanting to come home, kind of feeling like I was walking on eggshells, that feeling of, I would rather work than come home. And, it's almost like when you have an argument, the tension builds, and then you have the incident of an argument, and then you have the reconciliation or the love bombing, whatever you want to call it. And then you have a sense of calm, and then it starts all over again you know so for me, looking back, I think there were lots of things that made it difficult to leave, um but there were all, part of the gain in that relationship at that point was that I didn't have anywhere to go to. So I was gaining a home at that point. In the beginning, I was gaining a relationship, where I felt that someone loved me, I felt cared about. And actually, part of the difficulty in leaving is that, you're not in love with the person that they have become. You're in love with the person that you met. So for me, there was constant arguments, and there was two critical points within our relationship that made me decide this is the time to leave. And that was when the relationship became physically abusive. And at that point, that was the time where, for me, this is the time where it needs to end. So, two critical points. The first one was strangulation. And the second one was that I found out that I was pregnant. So there was two issues that was really critical in me deciding that now is the time to leave.
With physical abuse, usually that is the result of escalating abuse. Were there signs before the physical abuse that you look back and you're like, aha, this is where I knew that it could go down this path?
Yes. There was lots of arguing, lots of escalation in that arguing as well. Lots of blaming. It was always my fault. There was no sense of ever in our relationship he ever said sorry, even when he was strangling me at the top of the stairs. Did he ever say sorry for that? It was always my fault. There was never any empathy in connection to how I felt, from the arguments. It was just that, well, if you hadn't have done this, or if you hadn't have said this, this wouldn't have happened.
And then you had the part where you mentioned that you were pregnant,
Yes.
right? Was this after the abuse was happening?
This was as the abuse was happening. So in the December, so I left in the March. In the December was one of the situations where I was being strangled at the top of the stairs. Okay, it was Christmas time. And we were arguing at the top of the stairs. And as we were stood there, I thought, and he was strangling me, I thought, I was looked at the top of the stairs and I thought, I'm going to die. What I didn't know at that point, part of the reason why I felt really angry at that point as well, was because hormonally I was pregnant at that point and I wasn't aware of that. So, and then that gave me another challenge. If I have this child, this man is always going to be in my life and I'm not going to have any control over that. But I do have control over what I do at the moment. What I would also say at that time, from December to maybe the February, and I left in the March, I wouldn't say that I had very good clarity of thought. I wouldn't say that my decisions were good in that time. When the abuse escalated to physical abuse, I felt very much, like lots of people that have been in abusive relationships, that your self-esteem is eroded. I felt like I couldn't speak up. I couldn't say no, so my sense of self had been destroyed by that point. But in speaking out in any way, it generally created some kind of argument and escalation.
And that's the difficult choice the women who are being abused have, is that if you're impregnated, if you get pregnant from a person that is abusing you, there is a very difficult choice you have to make, right? The choice is, let's be very clear, honest, right? It's an abortion, right?
Yes.
Or to not abort the child, right? And it's a
Mm-hmm.
conversation that I think some people don't have. Some people may say that, well, I can't do the first one. And that's perfectly fine. This is not,
Mm-hmm.
that's your choice, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then there's some people out there saying that, you know what? I'm going to be tied to this person forever. Do I want one, that connection, and two, do I want my child that connection, right? Because what you have to think about, ladies and
Exactly.
gentlemen, is from the woman's perspective, if you're being abused by someone and you give birth to that child, let's say, for example, you have a little girl, and that girl grows up seeing the abuse, she's going to think it's normal, right?
Yeah.
On the flip side, if you have a son now and he sees the abuse, he's going to think that's the way you have to treat women to get respect. So now what you're going through, you're passing it on to another generation, and it's unfair in that regard. Would you agree, Jude?
I think there's, I could only make the decision for myself. And like I say, I think in an abusive situation, you can only make that decision for yourself ultimately at that time. Like I said, did I have clarity of thought at that time? I was 45 and I really wanted to be a mother. So it was a really difficult decision for me to make. But I wasn't only just thinking about me. I was also, like you've just said, thinking about that child that would also then have some kind of relationship with the abuser.
And that is so tough. That is such a difficult decision because everyone, I would argue that there are many people out there that know someone that has either been abused,
Mm-hmm.
and this is going to hurt some people's feelings right now, or they know someone that is abusing someone,
Yes. Yes.
right? I know it's kind of mainstream now. We have a lot of celebrities and they're being caught, but ladies and gentlemen, there's an abuser in every family. Either you're aware of it or you're not aware of it, but you need to ask yourself a very serious question. If you are aware of it and you haven't done anything yet, why haven't you?
Hmm.
Right?
Yes. And for me, I suppose what I would say in connection to that is abuse generally happens behind closed doors. People don't generally see what is happening behind closed doors. What they see is, in my relationship, what they saw was this wonderful guy, this sales guy that could kind of talk anyone round in a room. They didn't see his behaviours, his false accusations, his put downs, his blaming, explosive temper. They didn't see any of that.
Yeah. And to that point as well, depending on how old we are, like the age of the person, it's very likely that abuse was a way for their parents to control a certain behavior when they were growing up, right? Like I think sometimes, and this is not to justify what people are doing, I think a lot of times we forget that it wasn't that long ago where we used hitting and that type
Mm-hmm.
of discipline to correct a
Mm-hmm.
behavior or at least
Yes.
to control a certain type of behavior, right? So you have
Mm-hmm.
people growing up thinking that's the way to do it. And there's some people who aren't maybe self aware enough to say that, you know what, I didn't like it as a child, so I'm not going to do it. Some people are
Mm-hmm.
just like, that's just the way it is. So when I enter a
Mm-hmm.
relationship now and I'm not getting my way, or
Mm-hmm.
I want to correct another adult's behavior, which is kind of weird to say, right? I do that, right? And then there isn't any consequence to me. And when you found out this person was this way, and then on top of that, they were having another relationship, what was going through your mind during that time?
I felt helpless at that point. My self-esteem was destroyed. Um, I just felt in a place where a real sense of shame and felt like I couldn't speak out to people and kind of say how things had escalated, that no one could see this. Would someone believe me? Because that's not what people saw. So and being a professional as well, because I was working as a therapist at the time, how do I then stand up and say to people, this is what's happening in my relationship? And ultimately, towards the end of the relationship, when it became physically abusive, I did do that. I spoke out to 3 people.
Yeah, the abusers are always like a perfect role model in public,
Yes.
right? It's behind closed doors, but a sign of the abuser is the person that's being abused because they're the one who has to keep the secret. They're the one who
Hmm.
has to keep the charade going, right? But
Hmm.
eventually they can't do anymore. They realize, you know what? It's not fair to me because you
Yes.
get in a state of mind where it's like you're protecting that person's
Hmm.
image, right?
Hmm. Well, it's that sense of, that gaslighting creates that kind of self-doubt, that confusion, that questioning of yourself. And there were points throughout the relationship where people pointed things out to me. So I would question that he was in contact with other people and that he was seeing other people. And he would deny it and he would say that wasn't happening. And then my cousin came to me and she said, "Look, Jude, he's on a dating site. I'm going to show you the dating site that he's on, you know." But he fully denied that he was on this dating site, and it'll never happen again. And I'll give you all my access to my sites, etc. And again, off we go around the cycle again. Of course, it did happen again. Yeah,
Gaslighting, the oldest tool in their toolbox, madam. It is
yeah,
as old as time,
yeah,
but it's still so effective because people begin to doubt their own reality. They're like,
yeah.
hmm, maybe I didn't see that. even though it's right in your face, phone in
Mhm.
your face, or it's him or her with another person, and you're seeing them walking down the street holding hands, and they look like a couple. You're like, no, I'm not seeing what I'm seeing.
Mhm. He's only taking his telephone to the toilet because he's checking messages. They could be from anyone. Of course they weren't, you
Of
know?
course, of course. Who hasn't heard about the office toilet? Right? That's where we close deals and sell homes, and we have the best business conversations on the John. Men, women, it doesn't matter. I remember someone, they sent me this meme, and the woman was in the washroom and she left her phone on the table and the phone was ringing. And I guess somehow she heard it through the shower. So she runs out of the shower to get the phone before I guess her husband can answer it. She has soap across her chest and all the areas strategically to hide things. And she has like soap all in her face, covered. She ran out of the shower, didn't even, still covered in soap, just so he wouldn't answer the phone.
Tells you a great deal, is what I would say.
Absolutely. Where you can't even, where, first of all, my phone could be ringing. And when I'm in the shower, I don't even hear it. But it's for you to be so in tuned with
Yeah,
that. And it's a little bit of
yeah.
humor, but it is
Mhm,
like that where
mhm.
they're so protective of their self-image that they want to make sure that you don't impact it in any way possible. So for Jude,
Mm,
I guess another question that I have for you is, and this
okay.
is one that I always like to discuss because I know it's a difficult journey, especially the first step of it. How
Mhm.
did you plan your escape from this situation?
Okay. I want to say, ultimately, planning escape from an abusive relationship is the most dangerous time for any survivor of abuse. So it has to be planned. And for me, I told three people. So I told my dad's next door neighbor, I told my sister, I told a woman at work who was an ex policewoman, and then I did all of the things that I needed to kind of do, which was like starting to create my own independence. So I packed a bag, I opened a bank account, I got a credit card, I and I'd been saving up to this point because obviously part of your safety is around your financial safety as well and having a home. So I'd been saving each month to be able to have a deposit for my own home. But because it was really difficult, what I actually said to him was that we were moving together. So he came to look at houses with me, believing that he was moving with me. So in that time to keep me safe ultimately while I was preparing. So from the December to the March, preparing my exit. So up to the day that I was leaving, he believed that we were moving together. And the day that I was moving, the next door neighbour came and helped me. I had I walked away with 6 dogs, a bag of clothes, and a washing machine. And I had a guy that came to pick up the washing machine who was specific that he was used to going into houses where there was domestic violence present. So I had specifically chosen this guy. And he came in through the door and he was huge. I was so surprised when he walked in, he frightened me. But he knew straight away when he came into the environment that things were not okay. So I planned my exit along probably 3 months, you could say. So I was planning that for 3 months, but saving for that longer than that.
Did that feel like the longest 3 months of your life?
A very long 3 months of my life. Yeah. And in some ways, the worst 3 months of my life as well, with the decisions that I kind of made within that time.
I can see someone who sees the light at the end of the tunnel, but they have to know that, okay, it's 2 weeks
Hmm.
away, 10 days
Yes.
away, five
Yeah.
days away, right? Like the countdown of it can be very taxing on the person.
Yeah.
And then especially if they still have to interact to some degree with the person. I know that when you planned it, and I agree that for a lot of people it is very dangerous because you don't know how the person is going to react if they find out,
Yeah.
as well as you don't know the consequences of it if it's unsuccessful. Were these some of the
Mhm.
thoughts that entered your mind
Yeah.
during that time?
Yes. The night before, I felt extremely nervous. You know, it was like, what if my next door neighbor, you know, my dad's next door neighbor doesn't turn up? What if the guy doesn't turn up with the van? How am I going to get away with the dogs? How am I going to move into this new house? You know, so it was all the what ifs of something going wrong. Um, that I just did not know at that point.
Now that you're out of it and it's been some time, how do you
Hmm.
feel now in comparison to
Now
how you felt before?
I've now my life is in a completely different place. Okay, I feel amazing. I've now been married for 4 years. I was on my own for 12 months after this relationship. I've been married for 4 years. I walked away with nothing, like I said, a bag of clothes and 6 dogs. And now I have 2 homes, and I've just sold a property in Bulgaria. So that's within an 8-year period of rebuilding, basically.
Congratulations. You must feel so proud of yourself.
I do, but I also think this is part of the reason why I do the work that I do, because I think if I can do that with the right support, anyone can do that.
So as we close, Jude, share some tips on how maybe those who are in an abusive relationship can identify that they're actually in one, because sometimes it's difficult to know really that you're actually being abused because we may ignore the signs.
Mhm. Some of the things, like I've already spoken about, it may be, that it feels like the relationship is moving too quickly. If you've been in that relationship for a long period of time, is there a lot of blaming going on? Is there a lot of, what I class as, is there jealousy going on in your relationship? Do you feel like, your partner punishes you by not speaking to you? Which might be something else that we wouldn't necessarily think of. Um, is there the biggest one for me was my partner never said that he was sorry. In all the situations, he never said he was sorry. Thinking about, does your partner check your phone? Do they check your emails? What does your relationship look like? Do they isolate you from family and friends? Do you see your family and friends often or not often at all? Is there physical abuse in your relationship?